for the future of their small business, their employees, and for the local economy. I think they're going to hear the other side of the stories. Some of these small businesses can't afford the lobbyists that are prowling the halls of Washington today, but they deserve our attention as much, if not more, than the big banks on Wall Street and the credit card companies. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection, so ordered.
I also ask unanimous consent to yield back any remaining morning business time, which I think is under 3 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now call.
Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-493, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 17, S-493, a bill to reauthorize and improve the SBIR and STTR programs and for other purposes.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I call for regular order now with respect to the Mcconnell Amendment, which is the pending amendment on our bill, Amendment number 183, and send a second-degree amendment to the desk.
The Mcconnell Amendment is now pending. The clerk will report the second-degree amendment.
The senator from Louisiana, Ms. Landrieu, proposes an amendment number 244 to amendment number 183.
I ask that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. That now puts us in order to continue the discussion of our very important bill that Senator Snowe and I have been managing this week on the floor, and I really appreciate all the members' cooperation, particularly the members of the Small Business Committee who voted this bill out 17-1 because they know, both Republicans and Democrats, the importance of reauthorizing this vital program, one of the federal programs that works, one of the federal programs that helps to create private sector jobs, one of the federal programs that gives the taxpayer a great return on their investment. One of the gentlemen that testified before our committee last week said for every dollar invested in this program, the taxpayers get a return of $107. That's a pretty good return on investment. So I see two of my colleagues here, Senator Cardin, a member of our committee and a very valued member of our committee, I may say. He'd like to speak for 5 or 10 minutes about an amendment that he thinks is important that we potentially could get included in our bill. And I see Senator Coates from Indiana, who's here to speak on the McConnell Amendment. And I think we don't have a consent, but we'll just kind of go back and forth as members come and continue to talk about some important aspects of the bill. I yield back my time. Well, the floor, not my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. President, let me thank Senator Landrieu for her extraordinary leadership on bringing this bill to the floor. This is a critically important bill for our economy. It helps small businesses. It helps the economic engine of America. It helps with innovation with small businesses. We already know that small businesses will be where most of the job growth will take place. We know that. We also know that with small businesses where most of the innovation will take place. When you look at patents that are filed, there are more from the small businesses per employee than you see from large companies. But in order to help small businesses be able to be innovative, the SBIR program is critically important. And I congratulate Senator Landrieu for bringing this bill forward. It's received a strong bipartisan support within the Small Business Committee. It provides the resources where small companies can take risks and innovate for America's future. It extends the program for 8 years, giving predictability to companies and investors so that they can go out and do what is best for this country, extending the program to 2019. It increases the allocations available for the small business community over time from 2.5% to 3.5%. It increases the individual size of the grants from $100,000 to $150,000 in Phase 1, and Phase 2 from $750,000 to $1 million. And it does one other important thing that's critically important, and that allows small businesses to bring in venture capitalists and still be able to qualify for an SBIR loan. So for all these reasons, I strongly support the efforts of Senator Landrieu and Senator Snowe, and would encourage my colleagues to support the legislation that has been brought forward. But, Mr. President, I come to the floor, and I'm going to ask consent that the pending amendment be set aside. But first, let me explain the amendment that I would like to offer. It's an amendment that would continue a policy that was started in 2009 to allow small businesses the opportunity to be able to get surety bonds to be able to compete on government procurement in the construction industry. Current law requires that for all federal and state construction projects, federal and state construction projects exceeding $100,000, that the company must provide a surety bond. Congress established the surety bond guarantee program more than 30 years ago because they knew it was difficult for small businesses to be able to get a surety bond. The limit had been $2 million under that program. So we assist small companies in being able to get surety bonds up to $2 million until 2009. As part of the Recovery Act, I offered an amendment with Senator Landrieu and Senator Snowe. This was a bipartisan amendment. In fact, I don't know of any objections to the amendment, that increased the amount from $2 million to $5 million and gave the administrator the authority to guarantee bonds up to $10 million to permit small companies to be able to compete with large construction companies for procurement work. Now, what's so difficult here? Well, you talk to a small business owner, and they'll tell you what they have to go through with their bankers in order to get any type of financing. And then if they try to get a surety bond, it's the same assets that the surety bond company wants them to guarantee in order to get the surety bond, putting them in a catch-22 situation where they can't get the surety bond or financing. They have to choose between one or the other. That's the reason why we established the surety bond guarantee program 30 years ago. Now, the higher limit had been in place through 2009 and 2010. And the SBA had estimated that they would issue $147 million in bonds in support of projects over $2 million. In March of 2010, the SBA performance report indicated that more than $360 million in bonds were actually issued. It's been an unquestioned success the higher limits. One other point. There's been absolutely no losses under the surety bond program, zero. That's why the Congressional Budget Office has given us an informal estimate that this amendment would have no direct impact on spending or revenue. This is a no-cost amendment that is strongly supported by the small business community because they know it's critically important for them to be able to compete fairly on construction contracts. It has bipartisan support. What the amendment does is extend the limits that we put in law in 2009 that expired at the end of 2010. That's the amendment. Now, Mr. President, I do want to make a unanimous consent request, but and that it would be but I understand that we're under an agreement now that we cannot ask that. I'm getting a word from my chairman. But let me just go on record to say that I would request that there be an opportunity for this amendment to be offered or included. I don't believe it's controversial. It doesn't cost, as I said, any expenditures. It's very important for the small business community, and it has bipartisan support, and I hope I'll be given the opportunity to be able to offer that amendment. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana is recognized.
I really want to thank Senator Cardin for his cooperation. He has been so patient. This is an important amendment. It's an amendment that Senator Snowe and I both support, and many other colleagues support it. We hope to get to a time, if not this week, as soon as we get back, to be able to offer and have this amendment pending so it can receive the vote that I do think it deserves. I see the senator from Indiana who I think wants to speak on a different amendment, so I'll yield the floor.
Mr. President from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. President, I thank the senator from Louisiana for arranging the opportunity for me to speak. I had intended to do this in morning business, but that time was running out, and so she graciously arranged time for me to speak as we took the bill back up. Mr. President, I want to speak today in support of the Mcconnell Amendment that would prohibit the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, from regulating greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. This is nothing more than a backdoor energy tax that should be the purview of Congress to enact or not enact, and not the responsibility or the authority given to the EPA. The Mcconnell Amendment, which is essentially the amendment language that was provided by Senator Inhofe and Senator Vitter, is patterned after the Energy Tax Prevention Act, which I have co-sponsored along with a bipartisan group of nearly 43 senators. An identical bill was passed recently by a House committee, and I want to state that it was also passed on a bipartisan basis. There is a growing consensus in this body and in Congress and in the country that Washington bureaucrats cannot be and should not be setting our nation's policy on climate change. The McConnell Amendment would make it clear that it's the Congress and not the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, that ought to be squarely in the driver's seat with regard to energy and climate policy. As a member of the Energy and noting that on a bipartisan basis we have the jurisdiction over this and not a regulatory agency, it has become clear that the administration's cap-and-trade bill has had no chance of passing the Senate, again because of bipartisan opposition. It's also clear that the White House has then determined that they're going to try to circumvent the Congress and push this agenda through rules and regulations made by unelected bureaucrats. And as a result, the EPA has created these new greenhouse gas regulations that are nothing more than a backdoor cap-and-trade regime. So while the administration talks about the need to strengthen the economy and put Americans back to work, these types of harmful rules that are being imposed by regulatory agencies, and specifically the EPA and climate control in this regard, are having just the opposite effect. Now, the reality of the matter is that not only in my home state of Indiana, which produces more than obtains more than 90% of its electric power from coal resources, but in states across this country that are using fossil fuels currently to generate energy, that this would have an extraordinary detrimental effect to their economies and to their provision of the necessary power needed to run the industries and the businesses, heat and cool the homes, and provide the electricity needed to sustain any kind of an economy. And particularly at a time like this, it's extraordinary that this backdoor effort by the EPA is simply throwing a major impediment to the economic growth which we are now starting to see after 2 years of a very, very serious downturn. The factories are starting to move again. They're starting to hire. The machines are starting to turn. And at a time like this, all of a sudden, a non-elected bureaucracy in this government, supported by the White House, simply says, now is the time to attack the climate control issue. We didn't like what Congress did when they turned this down, and so therefore we'll take over and do it ourselves. Now, I have nothing against looking at ways to provide additional sources of energy, alternative sources that can help with our climate control, whether that's solar, wind, biothermal, biomass, or geothermal, or any number of other alternatives. But these alternatives need to be cost-effective and competitive, and currently they are not. Now, I had the opportunity to serve in Germany as ambassador for 4 years, and during that time I was able to pay very close attention to a mandate that was imposed by the German parliament of switching to alternative sources on a mandated basis to 20% of the total energy being derived by a certain period in time. And as a result of that, the government provided enormous subsidies to wind and solar in particular and other alternative forms of energy, which was to be financed by those industries using fossil fuels to provide energy. The results of which recently announced in Germany that this is not obtainable. And this came at a considerable cost to consumers and to industries of that country. Two things happened. Number one, when the government provided massive subsidies to move to wind and solar, of course, a lot of attention went to production of those two types of alternative energy sources. Because it wasn't based on a competitive basis and because it wasn't based on what it would cost the taxpayer, there was an extraordinary subsidy that had to be paid by the fossil fuel industries, namely coal and oil, natural gas, to subsidize those sources. The problem is you end up with a distorted economic picture, and ultimately the cost goes to the taxpayer and to the consumer. Basically on a 5-to-1 or greater basis, the fossil fuel industry producing energy had to subsidize the alternative forms of energy, namely wind and solar, on a 5-to-1 basis, obviously raising prices to consumers, to industries using energy that was derived through fossil fuels. The second problem was that politics, which always happens in any situation like this, kind of rears its ugly head, and so every member of every state had to get their share of the subsidy. And so we see windmills all over the country that are not turning because the wind doesn't blow in some of those sections. And we see solar panels being installed in places where, in the north in particular, the sun doesn't shine very much. So you have an extremely cost-ineffective system put in place, subsidized by the taxpayer. So as we look forward to alternative sources of energy, we have to recognize the realities of what we're dealing with here, and particularly at a time when we're in economic distress and just trying to move into a better economic picture for the future. If we're going to impose massive taxes on industries that are providing energy to drive our factories and run our businesses and heat and cool our homes, that is going to be at a cost, a significant cost to employment, at a significant cost to all those who use that electric energy. And so these are issues that need to be debated in this Congress and with the American people in a transparent way, rather than addressed by a regulatory agency that has no responsibility to the taxpayer, no responsibility to the consumer, and is trying not to have any responsibility to the congressional authority that governs all this. I have yet, Mr. President, to hear of an alternative to coal for electric power generation. Most of our states, and particularly many of our heavy manufacturing states, are nearly totally dependent on this source of energy to run their businesses. Now, it just seems to me that while technology can help us in the future move toward a position of having some additional forms of energy to meet our energy needs, that today the reality of the fact is that we need this source of energy to run our economy. If only the EPA could recognize the reality of this situation, then maybe we could reach some common sense agreement on how to move forward on climate control and other issues. Instead, it appears this agency is determined to shut down coal plants, costing thousands of jobs, weakening the economy, and increasing electric bills for families that are already struggling to make ends meet. The EPA's actions simply are irresponsible and exceed their authority. And so we come back to the essence of what the Mcconnell Amendment does. It gives the debate and the responsibility and the authority to the elected members of the Congress and the jurisdiction to the body that should make these determinations in terms of its impact on the American people and the impact on our ability to provide sound energy and competitive energy to our businesses and homes. These are decisions that we should abandon, these are issues that should not be abandoned to unelected Washington bureaucrats who have made up their minds to regulate regardless of the consequences. These decisions belong to the Congress and not to the EPA. We need to pass the McConnell Amendment. I believe it will achieve bipartisan support because our nation's energy policy needs to be addressed by this body and not the EPA. So I urge strong support from the McConnell Amendment when it comes up for passage. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. And again, thank the senator from Louisiana for the time that was allocated.
Mr. President.
The senior senator from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to join my colleague, the chair of the Small Business Committee, to further elaborate on some of the key issues regarding the pending legislation before the Senate to reauthorize the Small Business Innovation Research and the Small Business Technology Transfer Program for 8 years. It really, when you consider what the value is of both of these programs, it's indisputable about what it will represent to our nation's economy during these perilous economic times. It certainly will bolster economic growth. It certainly will bolster small businesses and innovation and put America at the forefront of new technologies, as we've seen with the examples of those who have been recipients of the SBIR program, like notably Qualcomm, when they started more than 25 years ago with less than a dozen employees and $1.5 million grant from SBIR. And now they're, as we know, a Fortune 500 company with more than 17,000 employees, just to cite one example. But there are numerous examples, certainly in my state and in the chair's state of Louisiana, all across this country, and that's the point. It has an illustrious history, because I think it's important to note as well how far back this program goes, which was really inspired as a result of a White House Small Business Conference that recommended applying this program to a wider range of agencies. And in particular, according to the National Academy of Sciences landmark study on the SBIR program, the recommendation was grounded in a number of facts, including evidence that a declining share of federal research and development dollars were going to small businesses, difficulty among innovation for small businesses in raising the capital in a period of historically high interest rates, and research suggesting small businesses were at the vanguard of job creation, as we all know today is certainly the truth. And so the SBIR program was formally established in law back in 1982, and I was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and a co-sponsor, an original co-sponsor of that legislation. But it set out several goals, one of which was to stimulate technological invention, use small businesses to meet R&D needs, foster and encourage participation by minority and disadvantaged small businesses in technological innovation, and increase private sector R&D. So all of that has occurred with this legislation over that period of time in which it's been part of our nation's laws. And that's why it's so important when we reconvene after this recess, Mr. President, to make sure that we have the opportunity to move this legislation along. It is critical because we're at a point in time in our economy where we need the jobs, we need the investments in small business. This is not adding additional costs to the federal budget because it's drawing from the already appropriated funds for research and development within 11 different federal agencies that would set aside certain amounts in both of these programs for small businesses. It has broad support among a variety of organizations that are also crucial because they've been at the forefront of benefiting from these programs, understand the value of these programs and how they'll bolster our economy. I'm pleased to note that we have organizations such as the NFIB, the Chamber of Commerce, the National Small Business Association, the Small Business Technology Council, the National Venture Capital Association. In a letter, it stated that our legislation represents a fair compromise to ensure that America's most innovative small businesses can once again have access to existing government incentives to grow jobs by commercializing new discoveries, end quote. Furthermore, groups that have long been at odds with, these groups, these small business groups on SBIR reauthorization are now solidly behind the legislation because we worked over the last 2 years during the course of drafting this legislation for reauthorization and built a compromise and a consensus. What is the definition of venture capital, who can participate, because there had been a ruling within the Small Business Administration that said that it had to be individuals, which excluded a number of different organizations and venture capital firms to be able to participate. So we developed a consensus across the political aisle, broad support, that ultimately brought additional organizations on in support of this reauthorization. Most notably is the Biotechnology Industry Organization. Again, it's talking about bringing drug therapies to market. It takes 10 to 15 years, millions and millions of dollars to develop a drug therapy and bring it to market with the research and development and to ultimately commercialize that drug therapy treatment certainly is very costly. So to have the added benefit of venture capital investments from research and development funds that are already provided within the federal agency provides, I think, a long-term benefit for our country. In its letter, the Biotechnology Organization notes, and I quote, "This bill represents a balanced approach to ensure that America's most innovative small businesses can access existing incentives to grow jobs by commercializing new discoveries," end quote. The group also says it represents a compromise to ensure that America's small businesses remain at the forefront of global innovation. It also states it will help small biotechnology companies continue lines of medical research that might otherwise go unfunded. It will help to increase access to the early stages, which is a critical source of funding if we are to develop, the therapies that are so important to advancing our medical systems in this country and our health care. Bolsters economic growth, job creation, breakthrough drug treatments and therapies for patients, and also increases America's competitiveness in the global economy. And that is exactly the intent of this program. It was created in 1982, and that certainly underscores, I think, the value of this program as stated by the Biotechnology Organization. I'm confident that this legislation represents an unprecedented compromise that will give the necessary momentum to get this reauthorization over the finish line once and for all. This is a welcome change after 10 temporary short-term extensions, Mr. President, over the past 2.5 years. With, I think, the legacy of this program in making significant contributions to America's economy, to the well-being of small businesses. That's the engine that drives America's economy. We depend on small businesses to create, most of the jobs in America. We need to facilitate that, given the high unemployment rates, when we've had 21 consecutive months of unemployment rates at or above 9%. That's the longest stretch in our nation's history. So these two programs, collectively and individually, will contribute significantly to the growth of small businesses and job creation in this country. And that's why I think there's a broad array of organizations that are supporting this legislation, because it's a testament to its history of success. So, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senior senator from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I see that I have several colleagues on the floor, and there's another coming down to speak on an amendment. I want to just thank Senator Snowe for her explanation of some of the compromises and changes and modifications that the two of us have worked on with our committee members over the last 6 years to bring a bill to the floor that has bipartisan support, and I really thank her. One telling chart that I just want to put up before we recognize the senator from Vermont who wants to speak on an amendment. I think this is very interesting, talking about job creation and the importance of this program. One report that looked into this program between 1985 and 1995 said SBIR awarded firms added on average 5 times as many employees as comparable firms that did not receive SBIR funding. So again, this is the federal government's largest program. It really doesn't cost, amazingly, the federal government any more money, because it's research and development dollars that are already set aside for the purpose of research and development. It just makes sure that small businesses have access to these dollars. And when we do provide that kind of access, which this bill does, these grants and contracts go to companies that not only produce great technology but hire workers. So I wanted just to put that into the record. I have other things to put into the record as well. But I do see Senator Sanders, the senator from Vermont, on the floor. So at this point, I'll yield the floor.
Okay. I thank the senator from
the senator from Vermont is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it was my intention to offer a modification of the amendment that I offered yesterday on Social Security, but given the parliamentary situation right now, I can't do that right now, but I intend to do that as soon as I can. Mr. President, the original Social Security Protection Amendment that I had introduced, S-207, would have prevented Congress from cutting Social Security benefits, raising the retirement age, or privatizing Social Security without the affirmative vote of 2/3 of the Senate and the House. I introduced this amendment because I strongly believe that Congress should not be able to cut the hard-earned Social Security benefits of current or future eligible recipients without a supermajority in both the Senate and the House, and I continue to hold those views. I have heard, however, from some of my colleagues who strongly support protecting Social Security, as I do, that adopting this amendment would have had the effect of changing the rules of the Senate and establishing new precedents. While I personally do not share those views, I have listened to my colleagues' concerns and worked with the Majority Leader to modify this amendment. As a result, Majority Leader Reid is a co-sponsor of this modified amendment. There is not one senator or member of the House who is more committed to protecting Social Security than our Majority Leader, and I thank him very much for his support and leadership on this issue. Mr. President, the Sanders-Reid Amendment expresses the sense of the Senate that as part of any legislation to reduce the federal deficit, Social Security benefits for current and future beneficiaries should not be cut, and that Social Security should not be privatized. The Sanders-Reid Amendment makes it clear that Social Security has never contributed one dime to the federal budget deficit or the national debt. The Sanders-Reid Amendment makes it clear that Social Security currently has a $2.6 trillion surplus that is projected to grow to $4.2 trillion in 2023. Our amendment makes it clear that it would be absurd to discuss Social Security within the context of deficit reduction. Let me repeat what I said yesterday. Social Security has not contributed one nickel to our deficit, and it makes no sense to conflate the serious problems of our deficit and national debt with Social Security. That is just not an accurate projection of reality. Mr. President, as I think we all know, in 1983, Social Security did face a crisis. Within a 6-month period, at that point, Social Security would not have been able to pay out the benefits it owed to eligible Americans. Today, Social Security can pay out all benefits owed to all Americans who are eligible for the program for the next 26 years. So, Mr. President, I will speak more about this issue, but I did want to inform my colleagues that we have modified the amendment. We intend to modify the amendment that we've offered, and we will do that when the parliamentary process allows us to do that. So with that, I thank the Senator from Louisiana for allowing me to say a few words, and I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Nevada is recognized.
Mr. President, I want to talk just for a little while on the Hutchinson Amendment, which basically says that while the health care reform bill that President Obama and the majority passed last year, while that's going through the courts, that anything dealing with it would be put on hold until the courts decide whether it's constitutional or not. The reason that this is an important amendment is because states, private companies are being forced to put and spend a lot of money putting programs in place that may or may not have to be put into place if this bill is indeed struck down as unconstitutional. During the health care debate last year, I raised a constitutional point of order against the individual mandate because, frankly, I believe strongly that it is unconstitutional. A few of the courts around the country have agreed with me that it is unconstitutional. Unfortunately, that constitutional point of order was voted down along party lines. But there still is a very good possibility, and I'm hoping that the courts will see it this way, that this bill will be struck down as unconstitutional. And because there are no what are called severability clauses in the legislation, in other words, if one part is found unconstitutional, the entire bill is unconstitutional. Well, the individual mandate is the place that most people are focusing on, and if that's struck down as unconstitutional, the whole bill will come down, and yet states, with all of the program, the exchanges that they have to set up, literally will be spending hundreds of millions of dollars in trying to comply with a law that may be unconstitutional. We shouldn't have them go through that. We should actually have an expedited procedure to go through the courts, put everything else on hold so that we can determine whether this thing is constitutional or not. Now, let me talk just a little bit about some of the problems that we're seeing with the health care bill. First of all, we know that this is raising premiums. It was promised that the average premium in the United States would go down by about $2,500 per year. Well, I'll just give you one quick anecdote. Yesterday, I was on the phone with one of Nevada's largest employers, Steve Wynn of Wynn Resorts. Steve is known to be probably the most union-friendly, the most employee-friendly employer in the state of Nevada, has been for years. His employees love him. He takes very good care. He pays well, has good benefits. Well, he told me yesterday that they did a study from 2005 to 2010 of their health care cost. They increased on average of about 8% a year. This year, and he said specifically because of this health care bill, their increase was 12%. So that's a 50% increase in the rate of growth of their health care costs. Well, what did that mean to the average employee that works for the Wynn Resorts? First of all, Wynn Resorts shouldered a lot of the cost, but the economy in the state of Nevada is pretty tough right now, and it's pretty tough on the employers. Well, they passed on some of those costs to the employees. It means an additional $900 a year in cost to the average employee that works for Wynn Resorts. Well, this is just one story, but it's a story that I heard repeated across the state of Nevada over and over again. And while two-thirds of our economy is on consumer spending, is incentivized by consumer spending, if you take $900 out of the pockets of the average employee in my state, and I'm sure that's being repeated across the country, well, that's less money that people have to spend to encourage economic growth. We know that this bill, which was over 2,000 pages, which, you know, very few of anybody read it, and if they did read it, I can guarantee you that almost no one understood it, even the people who wrote it, now has over 6,000 pages worth of regulations, which once again are incredibly complex. And unless you're a large company who has experts, who has lawyers who can search through this to try to figure out what that means to you, it's very difficult to understand. There was over $500 billion taken out of Medicare, and it wasn't taken to shore up Medicare. It was actually taken out to create a brand new entitlement program. So you take $500 billion out of Medicare and put it toward a new entitlement program instead of shoring up Medicare and making Medicare a better system. There were also higher taxes in this bill, literally hundreds of billions of dollars in higher taxes. And you know, they passed it and they said it was just the health insurance companies that were going to tax, and it was just medical devices that were going to be taxed. There were 11 different new taxes in this health care bill, one of the reasons that I oppose the health care bill. Well, let me just give you a real-life example of one of those taxes, what it really means to patients and to future cures. One of the companies that produces, it's an extraordinary device for people who have uncontrollable seizures. Epilepsy, common name for seizures. One of the treatments for that is an electronic device that actually helps reprogram the brain. They actually implant this. It's kind of like instead of a pacemaker for the heart, it's like a pacemaker for the brain. Well, that's a very expensive device. It's over $20,000. The company that makes that device puts most of the money that they make back into research and development for making better devices. Because of the new tax, they're not going to have nearly the resources to put back into research and development to develop better products to help more patients in the future. And to tell you, if we wouldn't have this device in the first place, many people out there have completely uncontrollable seizures. Well, with this device, over half of those people actually are able to control their seizures. Nothing else works. No other medication works for them, but over half of them are able to control their seizures because of this device. These are the types of things that this health care bill is doing damage to our health care system, which is, by all accounts, the finest health care system in the world. The biggest problem with this health care bill is it didn't go after the number one problem that we have in health care, and that's the cost of health care. We understand that health care is too expensive in the United States. Even though it's the finest quality, it's too expensive. So what we should do is strike down this health care bill as unconstitutional or repeal it, and then start with a health care reform bill that goes after the true problem in health care, and that's the cost. Well, what can we do about the cost of health care? Well, we all know that, first of all, that some we should absolutely do, that many states are doing. State of Texas is a really good example of where it's been successful, and that's to change our medical liability laws, to rein in these out-of-control trial lawyers across the country that are driving up all of our health care costs. We all know that doctors prescribe all kinds of unnecessary tests just to cover themselves in case of that one lawsuit. Well, when good medical liability reform bills are put into place, what happens is the true victims of medical malpractice actually get compensation because there aren't as many frivolous lawsuits clogging up the courts. But the other thing that happens is the cost of medical liability insurance, the cost to our health care system goes down. The Congressional Budget Office just came out with saying that there would be approximately $70 to $80 billion in savings over the next 10 years if we enacted medical liability reform. I think that number is very, very low, but it's not insignificant. But there's many other things that we can do with health care, a health care reform bill that brings down the cost. First of all, we need to put the patient back at the center of the health care universe. We understand that today we have what's called a third-party payer system. The person receiving the care is not the person paying for the care. We need to put the person that's receiving the care back with what's known as some skin in the game so that they start talking to their doctor. Their doctor has to talk to them. This can be done through things like health savings accounts. Health savings accounts combine a high-deductible policy with a health savings account either that their employer puts in or they put in, and then they go and actually negotiate with their doctors. The beautiful thing about that is they don't have to worry about a gatekeeper. Anybody that's been on an HMO understands you have to go through a gatekeeper to get to a specialist. Well, if it's your money, you can just go to any doctor that you want to go to. And the doctor has to be accountable to you because it's your money. If we had over 300 million people in the United States shopping for health care, we understand that market forces will drive down the cost and bring up the quality. Unfortunately, the government right now already controls health care pretty much in the United States. It pays almost 60% of total bills. When you add them all up, about 60% of the bills are paid for by the government in the United States. So the government already controls health care, and that's the reason we continue to see costs in health care skyrocketing over the many years until recently where the costs even are now going up faster. So this health care bill, reform bill that was passed last year, some people call it Obamacare, that bill is actually making things worse, not making things better for health care system of the United States. So, Mr. President, I believe strongly the Hutchinson Amendment, which would freeze any of the implementation of the health care bill until it is decided in the courts whether it's constitutional, is a vital amendment to making sure that states don't waste a lot of money, that private sector companies don't waste a lot of money complying with a bill that may be struck down as unconstitutional. And this is money you can't get back. Once it's spent, it's gone, and we can't get that back. And we already know how much the states are struggling with their budgets right now. You're seeing what's happening in Wisconsin, Ohio, my state, and Nevada. That's happening all across the country. So we need to put this bill on hold until we know whether it's going to be constitutional or not. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senior senator from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak on a matter that is of real concern to many of us in this body, but more importantly to the citizens of this country. And it has to do with our efforts to climb out of this long recession. And there are still pockets of the United States, presiding officer's home state, my home state, that feel like we haven't made any progress. And when I talk to small business owners in my state, I know they're still weathering the storm. They're looking to invest in a down economy, and they really want to start hiring again. And that's why I'm really glad that we're once again debating a small business bill and that I have a chance to reintroduce the Bipartisan Small Business Lending Enhancement Act as an amendment. Now, I have to say I feel a little bit like this is Groundhog Day. I'm looking at my friend from the great state of Louisiana all over again. Back in October of last year, a report by the New York Federal Reserve said that 3/4 of the small businesses looking for credit last summer were turned down or only received some of the financing that they requested. And in this report from the Federal Reserve, they stated, and I want to quote here, reports from small business owners of a credit gap have been both vocal and frequent. So we here in Congress have decided to act on and try to extend additional credit to small businesses because more credit means additional growth and therefore increased job creation. Now, unfortunately, or I should say, fortunately we created a $30 billion lending fund for banks, but the unfortunate part of that is we didn't simultaneously allow credit unions to do more. And since that time, banks have been reducing credit availability, and even after receiving $30 billion of taxpayer money in last year's Small Business Jobs Act, banks are still not meeting the demand for small business loans. And so in light of this, I'm still very committed to finally taking the common sense step of allowing credit unions to increase the amount of money they can lend to small businesses. And I've, once again, as I just mentioned, introduced the Bipartisan Small Business Lending Enhancement Act, which would open up additional credit to small businesses without costing taxpayers a dime. Let me say this again, without spending a dime of taxpayer money. You have to acknowledge that credit unions know the small businesses in their communities that need loans to expand and hire, and the credit unions have money to lend to those businesses. Now, right now, Mr. President, federal law limits the amount of small business loans a credit union can extend to 12% of their assets. Nearly 350 credit unions, accounting for approximately 60% of all business loans subject to the 12% cap, are facing their cap and will have to dramatically slow their business lending. Hard for me to believe this fact, that government's telling these financial institutions that they cannot help create jobs in their local communities. And that's why my amendment would double the amount of money credit unions can offer small businesses. We all know these small business owners. I want to touch on two stories. I was particularly compelled by a small businesswoman in Colorado by the name of Stacy Hammond. She's a small business owner in Thornton, Colorado. She started her own business, First Street Salon. And she initially went to a bank for a loan, and she got turned down because credit was in short supply. And to make her dream of owning her small business come true, she went to her credit union, and they gave her the loan that she needed through a second mortgage on her home. And then the success story that Stacy's unfolds in some pretty dramatic and wonderful ways. When I visited her, she had plenty of business, and she'd even hired more workers. And these are real American jobs and a shining example of economic expansion that wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for a credit union stepping up and offering her a loan. Another Coloradan, Lisa Herman of Broomfield, she emailed me a success story about her securing of a credit union loan to expand her business. She's the co-owner of Happy Cakes Bake Shop, getting hungry, it's lunchtime here, in Denver's Highland Square neighborhood. And she's been in business since 2007. And despite some real trouble in the economy, her business has blossomed. Her revenue's up 25% by the summer of 2009. She's booking 20 weddings a month, and she's had to expand her retail operations and move into a new shop. Same story. When she wanted to secure a loan through a traditional bank, it didn't happen. It didn't pan out. But her local credit union was able to provide her with a loan she needed to grow her business. That meant more jobs and more business for her community. And that's the American way. Now, I know that banks and credit unions are competitors. They don't always get along. But this is not about them. It's about small business. And for perspective, credit unions today only represent 4.5% of all small business loans at depository institutions. And if we take this common sense step that I'm proposing and double small business lending by credit unions, it would still leave 91% of the small business market to banking institutions. So again, this is a smart, no-cost way of increasing lending without drastically changing the composition of the small business lending market. Now, since some of my colleagues I know have been visited by folks who do not want credit unions to lend more to small businesses, I want to make one thing clear. Credit unions have been making small business loans since their inception in the early 1900s. That's 100-plus years ago. And it wasn't until 1998 that there were any limits whatsoever on what they could loan. So that means for 90 years, credit unions were free to help small businesses in their own communities without the federal government unnecessarily getting in the way. And that meant uninhibited small business support, growth, and job creation. But right now, the federal law, whether initially well-intentioned or not, is keeping these jobs from Americans who are out searching for work. It's estimated that the average credit union small business loan is approximately $220,000, and that each $92,000 in additional lending on the part of the nation's credit unions will create one additional job. In the next year, I'm going to say, Mr. President, when we adopt this concept, credit union businesses would increase, credit union business lending would increase to $10 billion, which conservatively would create 100,000 new jobs. All we have to do is increase the statutory cap on credit union business lending. I want to just state again for the record, these small, simple statutory changes would not cost taxpayers a cent, but they would dramatically increase the amount of private capital available to small businesses to help make payroll, buy inventory, expand, and innovate. And moreover, the proposed statutory changes are safe and fully supported by the National Credit Union Administration, which is the credit union regulator, and they're the product of an agreement reached last year by the Senate Banking Committee and the Treasury Department. As I begin to close, Mr. President, I want to note all the organizations that support increasing credit union small business loans. The Americans for Tax Reform, the National Association of Realtors, the National Small Business Association, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Heartland Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Cooperative Business Association, the National Farmers Union, the Hardwood Institute, the National Council of Textile Organizations, and many others. Well, Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to do the right thing, and let's finally fix this unnecessarily federal limit on small business loans and support a smart, focused bipartisan amendment to increase job growth and support for our local small businesses. Mr. President, I believe my amendment is at the desk. I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendment be set aside and that the Udall Amendment number 242 be called up, and I ask for its immediate consideration.
Is there objection?
Yes, I object, Mr. President, and I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, if I might ask through the chair, my colleague, the nature of the objection, given that this would be so important to expanding business opportunities when our economy is in a troubled state.
Senior Senator from Louisiana is recognized.
I'm happy to report or respond through the chair that a member of the Senate has put a hold on parliamentary procedures that would allow us to move forward on any amendments. The senator should be aware, and so we're unable at this time to have his amendment pending. But I am personally happy that he came down to speak on the amendment. There are other people that feel strongly about that issue as well, so I hope the senator understands we're just not able to take up his amendment at this time.
Mr. President,
Senator from Colorado.
I know that the senator from Louisiana has an interest in the possibilities of this legislation. I also see my colleague from Maine, who has graciously joined me in co-sponsoring this important bill and as well understands the way in which we would trigger innovation, lending, and job creation. I want to thank her, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I know the senator wants to speak actually on this amendment. I do have a unanimous consent request that the 12 committees meeting today during today's session be allowed to meet. They have the approval of the majority and minority leader. I ask unanimous consent these requests be agreed to and the request be printed in the record.
Without objection.
I also want to submit a statement ask unanimous consent to submit a statement from Senator Johnson, who does have jurisdiction over the amendment that Senator Udall just spoke about. The Banking Committee has the jurisdiction, not the Small Business Committee, which was one of the concerns that I have. And on behalf of Senator Johnson, who opposes the Udall Amendment, I'd like to just submit his statement for the record.
Without objection. So ordered. Senator from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to ask unanimous consent that Yelena McWilliams, a detailee with the Small Business Committee, be granted floor privileges during consideration of this legislation.
Without objection. So ordered.
Mr. President, I want to rise in support of the comments as well as the initiative of the senator from Colorado, Senator Udall, because I do think that this is a critical way in which to create jobs in America by lifting the cap, as he indicated. There had been a historical norm of no cap when it came to the amount of small business lending or business lending that could be done by credit unions in this country. And so I'm very pleased to join him in this effort. Hopefully we will have the opportunity to consider this initiative here on the floor. It deserves it at a time in which government essentially has exhausted all of its options to creating economic growth and focusing on job creation. This is one demonstrable way in which we can create jobs in America, and also have a massive infusion of capital at no cost to the federal taxpayer, at no cost to the federal government. The senator from Colorado indicated for 90 years there had been no cap up until 1998, in which the Congress decided to impose a cap of 12.2% on business lending that could be done by credit unions. We want to raise that cap to 25%. That will represent more than $100 billion of capital into our nation's economy. It could create potentially, as the senator indicated, 100,000 jobs. I know it would be 1,000 jobs in my own state. We're a small state, Maine. We have 1.3 million people, and more than 600,000 Mainers are members of credit unions. Credit unions play a pivotal role in our state and our nation's economy. They're on the front lines each and every day in our small communities. And one of the greatest handicaps and hardships right now for small businesses, as we all well know, and even demonstrated by, a recent survey by the Federal Reserve saying that 3/4 of small businesses looking for credit last summer were turned down or received only some of the financing that they requested. That's the most recent report. So small businesses are on the front lines. They're the ones that are the innovators and the job creators, and yet they are not getting the access that's necessary to capital to create jobs and to make the investments in their companies and firms that will grow this economy. And so it's indisputable about the value that this legislation would represent in terms of helping small businesses have access to that capital. Credit unions, have been making business loans since their inceptions over more than 100 years. They provide, I think, the essential capital in small communities. They're very responsive. They also they understand in determining credit-worthy customers. They understand the nature of their communities. They know everybody. And they can make a difference in so many businesses as well as in the community. We know that in the past they have demonstrated responsible underwriting practices and strong management. They have money to lend. They know they're small businesses in the communities, and they stand ready and willing to help our economy grow. And at a time in which we're struggling to find ways to create jobs, this is one sensible solution to that approach, frankly. I'm very disturbed about the inability of our economy to create the kind of jobs that Americans deserve. I mean, as I said earlier, we have experienced 21 consecutive months of unemployment at or above 9%, which is the longest stretch in history. The second highest was back in the early 1980s. But if you think about the jobs that were created last month, which was one of 3 months in the last 2 years in which we created 200,000 jobs, last month at that rate, it would take 8 consecutive years to achieve the pre-recession unemployment levels of 5%. We'd have to create more than 300,000 jobs every month to reach, over the next 2 years, a 7% unemployment rate. In the month of January, we only created 36,000. And so you see, we have a long ways to go. And the net unemployment rate, frankly, as it stands today, it's 8.9, but really, in all reality, as an article indicated yesterday in the Washington Post, it's closer to 10.5% because so many discouraged workers. So here is, I think, an important, effective, responsible way of putting money into the communities, allowing the credit unions to make the decisions in terms of credit-worthy customers and businesses, and saying, let's allow them to be able to lend more money to the small businesses, the entities that are going to help to drive, this economy. We depend on small businesses. They're the ones that are going to make it happen. So that's why I want to commend the senator from Colorado for offering this initiative. It's important. It's vitally important. So I hope we don't defer the consideration of this legislation in this Congress, that we have the opportunity when we return from this upcoming recess to consider it and to vote on it. I also like to give a few other facts that I think are important to illustrate the value of these loans in the community. The Treasury Department found that 25% of credit union member business loans were made to members with household incomes of less than $30,000, and that these loans total 13% of the outstanding member business lending balances. Another 20% went to households with incomes reported to be $30,000 and $50,000. So we're talking about middle-income America. We're talking about mom-and-pop operations and middle-income households that otherwise will be denied access to credit. We know that. I've heard it chapter and verse. I've heard it anecdotally from so many businesses in my state and across the country. We've heard testimony before the committee. The inability of so many small businesses to gain access to credit. Banks are not lending for all practical purposes to small businesses. That's why we've had to do everything we can to make sure that we can provide some kind of ability for them to have access to the credit and to the type of loans that allow them to stay in business and to sustain their firms in these very difficult times. So, again, I want to thank the Senator from Colorado for offering this initiative, and hopefully we will have the opportunity to consider it and to vote on it, because it is one way of stimulating job growth. I think that's indisputable based on the track record of the previous lending that's been done by the credit unions, and this is one opportunity that we should be able to have in making sure that small businesses have the access to capital that will allow them to continue. So, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.